Hey, how you doing? Good evening. It's June 12th, and today is day 8 of 37 conversations. And wanted to have a conversation today regarding intersectionality. I know that there have been a lot of conversations thus far where I've referenced intersectionality and talked about how the Black Lives Matter movement intersects with other issues that are impacting the Black community. In that, I think that to have a big focus on the Black Lives Matter movement really requires us to take into consideration the intersectionality that exists there with the movement as well. And and using that terminology and that phrase, it was brought to my attention that some people weren't familiar with what intersectionality is, and through messages and such, some people had texted me, so I wanted to have a conversation on that today. Basically, intersectionality has to do with the interconnectedness that exists relating to social groups that could result in further discrimination, right? And I've worked in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector for about 15 years, and in my space, we are constantly talking about intersectionality. We're constantly looking at how social issues interact and are interconnected with one another, because it gives you a better focus and view on the overall. It provides more data, and also it provides an insight into how specific some of the matters are that marginalized population or populations is experiencing. So before I get into the Black Lives Matter aspect of it, I should probably give an example, right? So let's use homelessness. All right. So, I was having a conversation with my brother yesterday, actually, about intersectionality. And I told him, check into the conversation tomorrow, because, we're going to have a conversation about that. So say, for instance, homelessness, right? We have citizens and neighbors in our community that don't have homes and such. But there are a lot of factors and issues that are interconnected with the aspect of homelessness, right? So we've got mental health, chronic homelessness. Let's talk about chronic homelessness. So we've got mental health issues. We have friends and community members who are challenged with mental health issues that results in them being homeless. There's even domestic violence. Some people have become homeless because of their spouses abusing them within the home that they had. We've also got affordable housing. That's another issue as well. Affordable housing is a challenge for many people within our country and within communities in which we live. So you get what I'm saying, in the sense that those three issues, as it relates to, for instance, and there are many more that are impacting people being homeless. We have veterans. That's an aspect of homelessness. We have some veterans who haven't been able to assimilate back into society because of maybe some of their mental health issues, or maybe because of some of their opportunities that they didn't have, which has caused them to potentially be homeless as well. So the example I'm trying to provide for you is, if homelessness is a circle, or is a destination, and you have these different roads or interstates, right, that are interconnecting and traversing and crisscrossing the homelessness issue. You've got mental health, you've got affordable housing. What else did we just talk about? I said to go, domestic violence. That is intersectionality. Those issues also intersect with the issue of that is of homelessness. So hopefully that was clear enough to be able to really give you an idea as to what I mean when I'm talking about intersectionality, right? And from the very beginning of this series, I talked to you about how the impetus of this series has to do with a lot of conversations that I've had with friends, families, colleagues, and friends and family members, as well as colleagues, as it relates to the issue regarding Black Lives Matter. And it's really critical for us to identify that the Black Lives Matter movement shouldn't only be related to police brutality. So in the same exact way that I gave the example of homelessness, if the Black Lives Matter movement is right here, sure, you've got the aspect of police brutality. We've also got our brothers and sisters who are being detained and their families are being broken apart at the border, who are the Latinx community. That's another issue that intersects with the Black Lives Matter movement, because certainly there are individuals that are Black that are being impacted by that. We've got our brothers and sisters that are in the LGBTQ community. They have a whole set of issues as well, resulting to marginalization. I mean, even in the state of Florida here, the LGBTQ community is not by law protected from discrimination for housing and employment. So, when you have a person of color who already has their challenges, right? Obtaining jobs, potentially being marginalized, being looked over for roles because potentially of their race or discrimination. There's actually an additional layer to that because, here in the state of Florida, LGBTQ individuals are not a protected class as it is by the law. So there's also women's issues. We just had the Me Too movement, and hopefully that still maintains momentum and still is creating awareness for women and women's rights and so on and so forth. And then also as it relates to that issue as well, I just saw a post actually a couple days ago by the Washington Post. So we're all probably very aware of the pay wage gap, right? And the benchmark for that is white men. So women make 98 cents for every dollar that a white male makes for doing the exact same job with the exact same qualifications and skills, right? But Black women make 64 cents for every dollar that a white male makes in the exact same job with the exact same skills and so on. So it's really important to identify the aspect of the different characteristics, the different social classes, the different just simply put, ways in which matters intersect with an issue. And that's why, I think I referenced it in the conversation a couple of days ago. I'm going to do it more. And the reason why I'm really having this conversation today is not only because people asked about it, but then also because it's going to set me up for some conversations that we're going to have later on this month, because that's truly the reason why I believe that the Black Lives Matter movement should stand in solidarity with other marginalized populations, because not only are those populations also fighting for the same thing that we are, as in the sense of, being, treated equally, being treated fairly, justly, also, equity, we're fighting for equity in that regard as well. And so not only should we, to the Black Lives Matter movement be seeking to stand in solidarity with these marginalized groups, also there are people of color that are part of these marginalized groups, as we've already talked about. Women, our brothers and sisters who are a part of the disabled or special needs community, LGBTQ brothers and sisters out there as well. So it's really important for us to identify and understand the manner in which these issues intersect with whatever said issue or social problem that we're addressing. A big one is again, the main one that we're talking about right now is Black Lives Matter. It's not simply about police brutality. Certainly that's all we're hearing about in the news. That's what we're seeing in the news. It's a hot button topic, as well as just straight discrimination in the manner in which Ahmaud Arbery was killed. He was racially profiled. But there are other matters that are impacting the Black community beyond simply police brutality. Access to health care, access to education, those are critical as well. And those also intersect with the aspect, in my opinion, of Black Lives Matter as well. Why intersectionality is so important is because it creates data. We aren't going to look at an issue in its totality unless we truly understand how people are even being marginalized within that particular social issue. Earlier, we talked about homelessness. Of course, this whole series is about Black Lives Matter. So, it creates data for us. We can identify, where people are as it relates to who's being marginalized, or maybe there's even layers of marginalization that they're experiencing. I think also it creates research. So as a result, of course, of the data as a result of research, if it's the need for research, it's the need for identifying how to truly address an issue, how to truly provide solutions for an issue, right? Black Lives Matter is complex. Black Lives Matter is complex. Discussing race, which is what this whole conversation is about, is only one element of it. But then also identifying what other social issues that intersect with Black Lives Matter are critical as well. Because, I talked about the Flint water crisis in an earlier conversation. Not being able to have healthy drinking water is going to definitely impact someone's health, right? Black Lives Matter. There are transgendered people of color that have been getting murdered in this country. Record numbers last year, record numbers the year before, and this year. That should also be considered a Black Lives matter as well, because there are people of color that are being impacted by that. And again, there's duality and sometimes more than that as it relates to how they're being marginalized. An example, I can't even make this up. An example that I can give you that literally, as I was getting my mind right for this conversation today, the New York Times sent a push notification out saying the Trump administration finalized a rule to erase Obama-era protections for transgender patients facing discriminations in healthcare. So first and foremost, we already have a lot of, feelings and thoughts about where our healthcare system is, right? And then it's already well known that, access to healthcare within communities of color is a challenge, right? And now, the Trump administration is rolling back protections that the Obama administration put in place to protect discrimination against transgendered patients. So, this is an exact example of what I'm talking about. That particular group, transgendered people, are, in danger of experiencing further marginalization, further discrimination. But then also we already know that people of color are already having issues with access to healthcare in communities as well. So hopefully that's a present day real world example right there of this issue and this matter here. Because if we just simply looked at the way that, for instance, going off that example, white members of the LGBTQ community who are going to face this exact same discrimination, right? If they're transgender, they're going to face this exact same discrimination potentially from this, Trump administration's rollback of those provisions for them. But then if you're also a person of color, though, you're already potentially having difficulty with having access to healthcare on top of that. So, that's the reason why it's really important for us to identify how these issues intersect, because they're complex and we need complex solutions for them. I think as individuals, it's really important to identify as well that beyond just data, that foundations are conducting and funding, is beyond just data that nonprofit organizations are conducting as well, to really identify how some of these social issues, whether it's homelessness, the workforce, women's issues, LGBTQ matters, environmental justice, so on and so forth, intersect with marginalized communities. I think it's also important for us to identify that another way to come to this, to the same end, is to apply a social equity lens on these issues as well. So if we're talking about, homelessness, or we're talking about the pay wage gap, it's critical to make sure that we put a social equity lens on that. How are marginalized populations also being impacted by said issue? Perfect example, like I just talked about earlier, is the pay wage gap. So, if perfect example. So if we were just simply looking across the board, right, at how, women's salaries are measuring up to their white counterparts, it's 98 cents for every dollar. But then when we peel back that, that onion a little bit, peel back that layer and do some more data mining, we identify that, women of color, they're making even less than that. Black women are making 64 cents for every dollar. So, that information is critical because it, again, complex solutions, it requires in that situation, in that case, for, HR managers, maybe even governments, maybe even elected officials to be able to look at that and say, how can we provide opportunity and protections, and how can we provide opportunities to bolster this marginalized group to be equitable with their white counterparts? So, that's, we're going to have a conversation about equity and equality later on, probably in a few days, in a couple of days, probably. I have to map it out. But that's the main reason why, I wanted to talk about intersectionality, because not only did people have a challenge truly understanding it, but then also, we're going to be discussing a lot of intersectionality throughout the course of this conversation. I'm going to look at a comment here that someone said, if you identify with being a woman or a man, vice versa, something. Oh, that's Lance. Yeah, I got you, Lance. So, it's really a matter that we really have to look at, with our eyes wide open as it relates to Black Lives Matter. I think that if we're only looking at it from a matter of police brutality, then we're selling ourselves short, because there are other aspects and social issues within our communities that also impact our public health, our public safety, our public opportunity to obtain an education, an equitable education as well to our white counterparts. That if we don't consider those, if we don't look at those as well, then we are only going to potentially solve or address or be working on one issue. But then also, again, I can't reemphasize this enough, in the same manner in which we have other marginalized populations, it's my belief, in my opinion, that the Black Lives Matter movement should, stand in solidarity with those populations also, because they're fighting for the same thing we are: equity, and not to mention the fact that there are people of color that are being impacted in all those marginalized populations as well. So, I would be really, interested to know what people thought about that, about the intersectionality component. Really kind of wanted to keep this short. Last night's conversation went rather long with my brother. Also, again, working in the nonprofit and philanthropy space, there are entire, 2 and 3 day conferences just dedicated to intersectionality and how to, peel back the onion and identify how different social issues intersect as it relates to a matter that's being tried to be addressed in a community, that's trying to be addressed in a community. So, let me know in the comments, shoot me messages, create a dialogue. I'd be curious to know if, you have a conversation with your, loved ones or your family members or, friends, people at work. There are matters in the workplace as well that are intersectional that you should be thinking about and considering also, because, there are a lot of social issues that, we are being challenged with in our communities today. And being able to put a social equity lens to that and layer to that will really help us to identify who is further being marginalized beyond that. So that's everything for tonight. And tomorrow, I think I'm going to have a conversation regarding diversity versus inclusion. So that was something as well that's come up in conversations that I've had, and with conversations that I've had with people who've been following the series also. So hope you have a good night, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.